Welcome back once again to your infotainment YouTube channel CNW 24/7. So we are discussing Mending by Robert Lee Frost, a poem. And last time, or in the last segment, we finally had a line. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. He is all pine. My neighbor is having a pine garden and I apple orchard. Then let us go to the continuation of the lines. My apple trees never get across, and eat the corns under his pines, I tell you. So now the poet is thinking about the utility of the frontier, or any physical or political devices between people. Or is there any necessity for a fence or wall between the speaker and his neighbor? So he is citing a wonderful example. My apple trees, the poet, the speaker's apple trees never get across the field of his neighbor and is not going to eat the corns under his pines. So the poet's, the speaker's apple trees never going to encroach the pine trees of the neighbor, are not at all going to eat the corns under his pines. And the poet tells the neighbor. Now, but the neighbor always says, good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. Actually, the neighbor foresees the future conflicts which may arise between the speaker and the neighbor. So future conflicts, that is a very important thing. Future conflicts. Future conflicts which are going to occur between the speaker and the neighbor. So the neighbor foresees that. And also, according to the neighbor, conflicts are inevitable in life. Conflicts are inevitable in life. So conflicts are inevitable in life, and the neighbor does not want to such conflicts to tarnish their relationship in future. That is why he is telling, good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. That is what. So when the poet or the speaker asks his neighbor, what is the utility of the fence or wall between them? And he is substantiating that his apple trees are not at all going to get across and eat the corns under his neighbor's pines. But he only says that good fences are necessary to make good neighbor. The old age saying his predecessors used. He does not want to go away from the set idea that good fences make a good neighbor. And also, the neighbor foresees future conflicts, and according to the neighbor, conflicts are inevitable of life, which are always the part of the life, and in such conflicts, the neighbor doesn't want to tarnish or destroy the relationship between the speaker and the neighbor. That is what here he is telling. He only says good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, the poet is satirically talking. Springtime, because mending the wall is a ritual every spring, and it is a repetitive work, and it is a fruitless work. So he says, Spring is the mischief in me. And I wonder, he's so much surprised if he wanted to make his neighbor think. He wanted to put a notion in his head. He wanted to make his neighbor think that. Why do they make good neighbors? Why there is the necessity for a fence or wall between them? Isn't it? Of course, he can have a fence or wall where there are cows. Of course, the neighbor wanted to keep away the cows of his own neighbor. Of course, he can just create a fence or a wall. And the poet says but here there are no cows. But here there are no cows. Actually, Robert Lee Frost is very fluent in philosophy. Robert Frost is very fluent in philosophy, and he is just using a allegorical or a reference to the transcendental philosopher Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau. So, why I use here when there is a reference to cows? So, the poet Robert Lee Frost thinks that the neighbor can have a wall or a boundary if he wanted to keep away his neighbor's cows. And the speaker is telling him, but here there are no cows. So, in reference, we can understand that here he is referring to the transcendental philosopher Henry David Thoreau's mentioning of cow. Here, the poet says that the neighbor doesn't want a cow, but in Henry David Thoreau's memoir, that is Walden Pond. Walden, that is the name of his memoir. There is a reference to cows. So the transcendental philosopher David Henry Thoreau's memoir titled Walden or Walden Pond. Walden means life in woods. Life in woods. Life in woods means life in forest. So near the Walden Pond, he created a cabin and started to enjoy the forest life, where Henry David Thoreau derives pleasure from the lowing of the cows. From the lowing of the cows. So that is a positive aspect where the transcendentalist philosopher Henry David Thoreau derives pleasure from the lowing of the cows. Here, for countering the neighbor, Robert Lee Frost is telling that if you want to keep away the cows of your neighbor, you can have a fence or a wall, but here there are no cows. So actually this kind of philosophical allusion used by Robert Lee Frost, especially for countering or contradicting or opposing his neighbor. That is what here we come to know about. Now let's go. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could he wanted to make his neighbor think. Why do they make neighbors? Then what is the utility of a boundary between the speaker and the neighbor? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Then Robert Lee Frost is telling, if I want to build a fence or wall, I would like to know, I would like to ask myself what the speaker was going to wall in and wall out. What the speaker, when he wants to build his own fence or wall, he wanted to ask him what he was going to wall in, what he was going to wall, what he is going to separate out, what he is going to accept him. That is what I was walling in or walling out. And to whom I was like to give offense. That is a very important one. Fence, offense. Fence, offense. Actually, there is another kind of a literary device called pun. P-U-N. Pun is a play of words. Play of words. With different or contradictory concepts. Look here. Fence sounds same like fans. Fans of fans. So fence is really meant for selfish need, protecting something. That protection gives offense to others. A fence which is something, what do we call it, as selfish, and for the protection of someone's interest, is giving offense to others. The fence which gives offense to others. So it is what we call it as a play of words, which is another rhetorical device called a pun. So having two different or contrary concepts. So that is why. So what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. So by the construction of my own boundary and wall, whom am I going to give offense? Then again, something there is that doesn't love a wall. The poem began with the lion. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. So again that lion is repeated over here. And we will go for the following lines. Let us listen to what are the other following lines going to be here. Then that wants it down, I would say yells to him. Very good. Fantastic. So something there is that doesn't love a wall. Again that line is repeated. That wants it down. So something that wants to pull down the wall. Now the poet blames it may be the work of yells. So the work, I could say yells. Actually, Robert Lee Frost engages in flights of fancy. So, engages in flights of fancy. Engages in flights of fancy. Flights of fancy. Invoking that mythical elf. Invoking that mythical. Invoking mythical elf. Elf or elves, plural. Elf or elves. Actually, he is referring to that mythical supernatural spirit of folklore. Elves. So, the poet or the speaker is suspicious that sometimes elves may be causing damage to the wall. Then again the poet says, it is not elves exactly. So the destruction of the fence or the damage of the wall is not due to the work of the elves exactly. And I would rather, and he says that it is somehow further going, he said it for himself. Now you yourself decide who is responsible. The readers, the listeners, the learners can think who is responsible for the destruction of the wall. I see him there. I see my neighbor there outside, bringing a stone, grasped firmly by the top of the fence, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand. In each hand, left and right hand, like an old stone savage hand. So there is a confrontation between modernity and old attitude. The conflict between modernity and old savage attitude. Old savage attitude. So there is a conflict between modernity and old savage attitude of the neighbor. Like an old stone savage armed. Like an old stone savage armed is an example of a simile. Like an example of a simile. So to the speaker, the neighbor seems to be an ancient man, like an old savage, like an old savage. So his attitude is archaic, not coming to the modern attitude. That is what it is, like an old stone savage. So here, there is another allegory used here. So the repetitive and fruitless human labor is reminiscent of a Sisyphean myth. So I will just say a Sisyphean myth. A Sisyphean myth. Sisyphean myth. So when the speaker sees the repetitive nature of mending the wall and the fruitless labor of the neighbor, so this deed is reminiscent of a Sisyphean myth. Sisyphus is a king of Corinth, Greece. Sisyphus is a king of Corinth, Greece. Being crafty and deceitful. So this king of Corinth, Sisyphus, being crafty and deceitful, he was condemned by God to undergo his eternity by pushing a boulder upon the hill. And when the king reached the top of the hill, the boulder will roll back at the bottom of the hill. Again Sisyphus will come down and push the boulder up the hill. And this is repeated every time, and there is no fruit for the human labor. Actually, this punishment, this condemnation was decreed by God. Decreed by God because Sisyphus was crafty and deceitful. So he was condemned to spend his eternal life by carrying out a repetitive, fruitless labor. So that was decreed by God. But in mending wall, the neighbor as well as the speaker repeat as a ritual mending the wall at every spring. And it is a fruitless work, it is a repetitive work decreed by nature. That is why the poet says, there is something that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say else to him, but it is not else exactly. I would rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top, in each hand like an old savage stone, like an old stone savage, and he moves. Another very important one. Neighbor lives in the darkness. It is not to the physical darkness, not to the darkness of the of wood, not the forest darkness or the shade of the trees darkness, but it was the darkness of his mind. That is a very important. It was the darkness of his mind, not by the darkness of the woods or the shade of the trees, but he is behaving and he is telling the fixed idea that good fences make good neighbors only because of the darkness of his mind. He will not the woods only and not the shade of the trees. He will not go behind his father's saying. Yes, he does not want to be changed from the traditionally set ancestors' belief that. And he likes having thought of it so. He wanted to think it so well. He wanted to think it so well. And he again says, good fences make good neighbors. So the poem ends with the age-old saying handed over traditionally to the neighbor from his predecessors that good fences make good neighbors. Exactly. So here, let us try to understand something. The poet, that means Robert Lee Frost, sets the action of mending wall in progress. So when he sees the damage at springtime, he reaches out to his neighbor and fixes a day, and they meet together and walk along the side of their walls and mends the wall. That is a very important thing is told here. And there is something that doesn't love a wall, and the saying, good fences make good neighbors. So the readers will have to think who is right and who is wrong. And you have to decide upon the necessity of borders and fences. The necessity of borders and fences and other physical and political devices separating people. So we cannot say who is right and who is wrong. So poem is going like that. Now, let us go into the other rhetorical devices used by the poet in the poem. Another rhetorical device is imagery. So there can be so many audio imagery and kinesthetic imagery, visual imageries, tactile imageries, and olfactory images out there. But here in this poem, we come across visual imageries. So, visual imageries means, or imageries means, perceive things with the five senses. That is what I told you. So, kinesthetic is a movement. Kinesthetic is the movement imagery. So, while we read the lines of the poem, we can feel the movement in our mind. That is what. So, here, visual. Visual means, while we read the lines of the poem, such images could be seen inside our mind. That is what we call it as a visual imagery. And also while we read some lines of the poem, we can hear the sounds in nature. That is what we call it as audio imagery. And gustatory. Gustatory means tasting. Sometimes we read, we feel tasting something. And tactile, touching imagery. And olfactory, smelling images. So, but at this point, we are mainly talking about visual imagery, perceiving things with our eyes, one of the five senses. And let us see what are the examples for some, and some are lows. Lows. And some are lows, L-O-A-V-E-S. And some are lows and some are nearly bald. Some so nearly bald. That is one example. We can see the boulders just look like lows and balls. And he is all pine. The neighbor is having a pine ocean, and I am apple orchard. When we read these lines, such a picture could be seen in our mind. So visually, majorly. And you see the darkness and not of woods only under the shade of trees, the shadow given by the forest and also the shadow given by the trees. So while we go through these, we can understand that the poet applies visual imagery, perceiving things with our eyes, one of the five senses. Now, the poet definitely makes use of the distinct use of paradox, contradicting or opposing ideas by juxtaposing two opposing instances and opinions. That is a very important thing. So, distinct use of paradox. Two contradictory ideas are mixed together, and that is the distinct use of paradox by juxtaposing two opposing examples, instances, and opinions by repeating the contrasting lines. Contrasting lines, that is a very important one. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. The first instance is against the wall, and the second one, good fences make good neighbors, is defending the wall. How this can be? That is what two opposing, contrary, contrasting lines are juxtaposed for a distinct use of a paradox by Robert Lee Frost. So, something there is that doesn't love a wall, it is against the construction of wall, but the neighbor saying good fences make good neighbors is defending the construction of wall. So these are two opposite ideas. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, but another one is good fences make a good neighbor. So that is the wonderful instance of the distinct use of paradox by juxtaposing two opposing instances and opinions by repeating the contrasting lines. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, and good fences make good neighbors. Now, something there is that doesn't love a wall is repeated twice throughout the poem. Two times repeated. The poem begins with something there is that doesn't love a wall, and by the end, by the middle or just before the ending of the poem, there we can see something there is that doesn't love a wall. And also the neighbors say good fences make good neighbors. It is repeated also two times throughout the poem. So these repeated lines in the poem is another rhetorical device called a refrain. 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 So the repeated lines of this, so something there is that doesn't love a wall, and good fences make good neighbors, is actually talking about another rhetorical device called a refrain. So it is time to wind up this segment, and we will be meeting again in another segment with the concluding section of this poem, Mending by Robert Lee Frost, with another comparison poem, Dungeon, which is taken from Tagore's Gitanjali. And what are the other important questions? What are the issues the poem deals with? And what are the other realms of the poem of Mending Wall that we will be having in the last section of Mending Wall. And we ask you to subscribe and get the further notifications by pressing the bell icon. Thank you.